Hello, my name is Phil Easter, historian and writer from Baltimore, Maryland, also known as the Amazing Memory Man. We are recording tonight on Sunday, July 16th, 2023. This is YouTube story number 31 on my channel, which is Phil Easter, the Amazing Memory Man. Tonight I'm going to share past events for every day of the month of July. Many events in history, in sports, and a certain number in my own personal life, and especially in the second half of July. In 1976, I went to the Montreal Olympic Games, which were July 17th to August 1st, and I'll have a number of events I'll talk about those Olympics that took place 47 years ago this month. But we start with July 1st in history. July 1st is the National Day of Canada. In 1867, Canada won independence from Great Britain, but the country is still part of the Commonwealth of Great Britain that many countries still belong to. So July 1st is celebrated as Canada's National Day. Also, it was the birthday of two famous people who were born the very same day in 1961. The late Princess Diana of England and the great American Olympic track and field champion Carl Lewis were both born July 1st, 1961. July 2nd, in my hometown of Baltimore, that was a very big day in 1980. Harbor Place opened that day officially, and it received some national news recognition on a number of TV networks, and even the public broadcasting network, which usually their shows are recorded, shows about science and history and those masterpiece theater type shows, but they had a live performance that night from Baltimore's Inner Harbor of music and festivities that was carried on most public TV stations across the country live. It was very unusual for public TV to carry an event live, and that's how important they considered to be Baltimore's Harbor Place opening. And it was a great festivity. I was down there with some friends of mine from the apartment building I lived in about 1 mile away. July 3rd, in 1863, that was the final day of the Great Civil War Battle of Gettysburg. The battle lasted 3 days, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, resulting in a Union victory by the evening of July 3rd. One of the major turning points of the U.S. Civil War. Well, July 4th, you talk about an all-American day, that's it. Our Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. 56 men in Philadelphia signed the Declaration of Independence. Now, it might surprise some people to know that George Washington was not among those who signed. Why was that, you wonder? He's certainly considered one of the founding fathers and became the first president some time later. Well, it's because he was the general of the army, and he was out in the field fighting the British somewhere, where all his friends were able to sign the Declaration in Philadelphia, including John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, and many other founding fathers. So July 4th, we celebrate every year America's Independence Day. And I remember in 1976, on the 200th anniversary, it was really special, and the country celebrated in such big ways. And I went over from Baltimore to Washington, D.C. to see a concert that night. And to think just 3 years from now, in 2026, it will be 250th anniversary, another 50 years since the bicentennial. It should be a great time. July 5th, that was a day in 1979. I was on my long trip to Great Britain and Ireland that year. I traveled 15 weeks, and I saw Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on the Isle of Man. She came over from London that day because the Isle of Man was celebrating 1,000 years of its parliament. It's called the Tynwald. It was founded in the year 979. So in 1979, it was 1,000 years old, and I was there on July 5th for the big celebration. July 6th, in the year 2005, that was the day the International Olympic Committee awarded London the 2012 Summer Olympic Games. So they were awarded 7 years in advance. It takes some time to plan and organize. So it's a very happy day in London in 2005. London would become the first city to host the Olympics 3 times, as they did in 2012. But what a difference 24 hours made. The next day, July 7th, also 2005, sadly, terrorist attacks in London, killing somewhere around 15 people or so and injuring many people. A double-decker bus was attacked by bombs, and also a subway in the areas of, I think it's called Tavistock Square area. And some years before, I've been to London several times, and I once stayed at the Tavistock Hotel right in that area, in that general area where terrorists attacked London, sadly, one day after they were awarded the Olympics in 2005. But also, way back in 1924, at the Paris Olympics, that was the day that Harold Abrahams won the 100-meter run, and he was one of the 2 runners featured in the 1981 Academy Award-winning film, Chariots of Fire. That was 99 years ago this month, so next year will be exactly 100 years that took place in Paris, and sure enough, once again, Paris will have the Olympics next year, 100 years later, in 2024. July 8th is a very special day in my life. It was 38 years ago, this past July 8th, 1985, that I made the front page of the Evening Sun newspaper in Baltimore. A few months earlier, I discovered that the George Washington Monument here in Baltimore has had the wrong inauguration date ever since it was built in the early 19th century. It indicates that George Washington became president on March 4th, 1789. Well, the year is correct, but the day and month is wrong. It was April 30th he became president. And so I informed the Sun papers, and on July 8th, 1985, front page, I made front page news. The article says, "Oh my God, it's wrong, monumental error in the city." It was under an article about President Reagan, who was president at the time. So I was very pleased and honored to be the man recognized who discovered the monumental error. And the second page here went to many exact dates I know in history, many historical events, sports events that I know off the top of my head at all times. And so that was on July 8th, 1985. And my family and friends were very proud of me. July 9th. On July 9th, 1978, I was one of many thousands of people who went to Washington, D.C. to demonstrate in support of the Equal Rights Amendment. On July 9th, 1978, 45 years ago this month. July 10th, here in Baltimore, way back in 1936, the hottest temperature ever recorded in Baltimore. In all the years they've kept records since the 1800s, the hottest temperature ever was 107 degrees Fahrenheit. And that was way back on July 10th, 1936. And a local TV weatherman for Channel 11, WBL TV, just about every year on July 10th, he mentions that, that was the hottest day ever recorded in Baltimore, 107 degrees. July 11th, in the year 1804, that was the day of the famous duel between Vice President Aaron Burr and the former Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton was Secretary of Treasury some years before when George Washington was president. At this time, Thomas Jefferson was president in 1804, and Aaron Burr was his vice president. But they were had a disagreement about something, and they fought a duel with pistols, and Aaron Burr killed Alexander Hamilton on July 11th, 1804. July 12th, we go back again to the Paris Olympics of 1924. The hottest day ever recorded in the history of the modern Olympic Games. One thermometer in Paris indicated it was 110 degrees, unbearable heat. And yet the scheduled event was the 10,000-meter cross-country run. About 39 runners from a number of nations were entered in this event. 24 of the 39 runners could not even finish the 6.2 miles. And usually they would have no trouble running that distance. They were in excellent shape. But just to show you how intense that heat was. The man who won the race was Paavo Nurmi from the country of Finland, a northern country that borders Russia. And yet he's used to running a lot of cold weather too, but he was able to win the race on that very hot day. Paavo Nurmi, who won a total of 5 gold medals in distance running at the 1924 Paris Olympics. July 13th, in 1978, here in Baltimore, I'm proud to say that I met one of America's greatest Olympic champions ever. Jesse Owens came to Baltimore that day. He appeared at a track meet mainly for children, and I was able to meet him at that track meet just briefly and get his autograph. I was very proud to meet him. He became famous back in 1936 at the Berlin Olympics, where he won 4 gold medals in track and field, the 100-meter dash, the 200 meters, the long jump. He was part of the U.S. 4x100-meter relay in the 1936 Olympics, and I was able to meet him here in Baltimore on July 13th, 1978. July 14th, of course, that's the National Day of France, called Bastille Day. The French Revolution began in 1789, and on July 14th that year, hundreds of people stormed the Bastille to free, I think it was only 7 prisoners there that the king had kept prisoner, but it's called Bastille Day, and they have great celebrations in Paris every year, parades, and it's their national holiday, and I think their national anthem, the La Marseillaise, is one of the most beautiful national anthems in the world. July 15th. July 15th, in 1978, I know I just went down to the harbor. I had a nice time that day at Inner Harbor, one of the better times I had. It was still before Harbor Place, but I think they had some ships visiting Baltimore around that time. It was 2 years before Harbor Place was built, but they still occasionally had some activities there. And that was the day I went down there to enjoy that activity. July 16th, which is today, literally, it was in 1969, on that day, that the epic flight of Apollo 11 went to the moon. They left to go to the moon from Cape Canaveral, Florida. They would arrive on the moon on July 20th, the first astronauts who then walked on the moon. But they left Cape Canaveral on this day in 1969. July 17th. This is the day of all the days of the year I know more things than any other day. 1924, 6 days after he won his Olympic gold medal in the 400-meter run in Paris, Eric Liddell was back in Scotland and graduated from the University of Edinburgh. He was the other of the 2 major runners featured in the movie Chariots of Fire. I mentioned Harold Abrahams earlier, and Eric Liddell was the other major runner. So he graduated from college that day in 1924. 10 years later, 1934, Babe Ruth, the great baseball player, drew the 2,000th base on balls of his career, sometimes just called a walk. The 2,000th walk he took in baseball, and only a few players ever walked that many times. He was feared by the pitchers so much that sometimes they just walked him rather than giving a chance to hit a home run. Also in baseball, in 1941, the great Yankee player Joe DiMaggio had a 56-game hitting streak that began in May, continued through June into July. He got at least one hit in every game he played for 56 straight games, but it ended on July 17, 1941. He did not get one hit that day in the game that he played. 1955, that was the day that Disneyland opened in California, the Disneyland Amusement Park. 1961, the great baseball player Ty Cobb died. He had the highest batting average in baseball history, .367 lifetime, and he had over 4,000 base hits. Ty Cobb died July 17, 1961. 1976, that was the opening ceremony of the Montreal Olympic Games. And I was in Montreal already, but I did not go to the opening myself. It's very hard to get the opening ceremony ticket to the Olympics. It's the hardest ticket to get. So I watched on TV with the Canadian family that I stayed with, and that was very nice. I enjoyed watching it with them at their house on TV that day. 1979, two events happened on July 17th. The cruel dictator Somoza left Nicaragua. He left Nicaragua on that day and went somewhere in South America, where he was assassinated the next year, in 1980. Many people did not like him, and a new government took over when he left Nicaragua. But also, the great British runner Sebastian Coe set his first world record in the 1-mile run on July 17, 1979. He would take part in the next two Olympics, 1980 and 84, winning the gold medal in the 1,500 meters, which is close to a mile. So that also took place in 1979. Again, Somoza left Nicaragua. Sebastian Coe set his first world record for the mile. Two events on the same day, literally. Then 2 years later, 1981, a terrible event in Kansas City when skywalks at the Hyatt Hotel collapsed, killing more than 100 people. On July 17th, 1996, 27 years ago tomorrow, was a very happy day in my life. It was one of my 6 radio interviews. I was on a station called WJHU here in Baltimore, which has since changed call letters. Now it's called WYPR, but that time it was called WJHU. I was interviewed for 1 hour by host Mark Steiner on his noontime show. The subject, Women in the Olympics. And I've studied a lot about women's sports as well as men. So I was happy to share my knowledge of women in the Olympic Games over the years, including Nadia Comaneci, who I saw in Montreal in 1976, and many other women athletes that I've studied about. That was July 17th, 1976. So there's quite a number of events I've memorized just for July 17th, more than any other date of the calendar year. July 18th. Indeed, in Montreal in 1976, the day after the opening ceremony, I went to my first event, a soccer game between it was a soccer game between Poland and Cuba that day. It ended in a scoreless tie. July 19th, in 1976, at the Montreal Olympics, I went to women's gymnastics. And that's when I first saw, you see her picture here in the magazine, Nadia Comaneci became the first person ever, male or female, to score a perfect 10 in gymnastics. It's just incredible to see that in person. And she went on to score, over the next several days, she scored a total of 7 perfect 10s and won 3 gold medals. So I'm very happy I was able to see her one time even. And it was very nice because I had an extra ticket somehow for that event. And I took a young lady I met in Montreal, a young lady who was not interested in seeing too much of the Olympics, but she wanted to see at least one event. And so that was nice. Had a date with a Canadian girl and saw history made in women's gymnastics at the Great Montreal Forum. A very enjoyable evening. Now, July 20th was that wonderful day in 1969 when astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first two people to ever walk on the moon. As I mentioned earlier, they left Cape Canaveral on July 16th, and so was July 20th when the two astronauts walked on the moon. Just a wonderful day, not just for America, but for the whole world. Reaching the moon, often just a dream, but it happened on July 20th, 1969, and I saw that on television. I was 16 years old then. I saw it with my family on TV. Just wonderful. July 21st, it's a very sad day in my life. I will tell all of you it was the day my mother died in 1987. Her name was Mary Carolyn Robinson Easter, and she died that day in 1987. So it's a very sad day for me, but also in history, I will point out in the Civil War, it was the first major battle of the Civil War, the Battle of Bull Run on July 21st, 1861. But it's also the birthday of one of my favorite singers, known as Cat Stevens. He was born July 21st, 1948 in London. And he sings many beautiful songs. In fact, my favorite song ever is a song called Morning Has Broken. And his version of Morning Has Broken is the most famous one. Cat Stevens, born that day, 1948. July 22nd. That was the day in 1985 I had a special radio interview on WBAL radio here in Baltimore. It was 2 weeks after the article, this Evening Sun article came out. 2 weeks later, some people heard about the article, and I was invited to be on a radio show for 2 hours. It was very enjoyable on WBAL, one of the most famous stations in the Baltimore area, 1090 AM. I was on from 3 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the hostess of the show, a lady named Kelly Saunders, would often mention, interview me first about my memory and about the mistake on the monument, and then she opened up the phone calls, and many people called in with their birthday, and I could tell them something famous had happened without looking at any notes in front of me. Kelly would verify. So it's very enjoyable to combine history and entertainment at the same time to share with people. July 23rd, back to the Montreal Olympics in 1976. That was the first day of track and field competition, my favorite sport of all. There were early rounds of the 100 meters and also the preliminary run of the 10,000 meter run. The finals would be a few days later for those events. And actually the very next day, July 24th in 1976, was the final of the 100 meters for men, and Hasely Crawford of Trinidad won the gold medal. July 25th, that was the opening ceremony of the Barcelona Olympics in 1992. I watched that on TV, and it was an amazing thing when, as all of you know, at the opening ceremony, a very touching moment is when a runner lights the flame that will burn during the 2 weeks of those games. But in Barcelona, they did something different. They had an archer some distance away. An archer fired an arrow, would you believe, a flaming arrow into the cauldron and lit the flame. That's pretty amazing to see. You could look it up somewhere, I'm sure, and see that. It really was. July 25th, 1992. July 26th, back to the Montreal Olympics in 1976, I saw Lassi Viren of Finland win the 10,000 meter race that day. July 27th, that was the opening day ceremony of the London Olympics in 2012. And of course, Queen Elizabeth II presided over that ceremony. It was one of the most watched opening ceremonies in Olympic history. Somewhere around 2 billion people on television watched that. As you can see, many Olympic events from different years take place in the month of July, it seems like. July 28th, that was the opening day ceremony of the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. I remember that watching on TV from my home in Baltimore. It's July 28th, 1984. That was on the ABC network. A lot of the Olympics years ago were covered by the ABC TV network. In more recent years in the United States, NBC is now the TV network. But I remember that opening very well, and they played the music to my favorite movie, Chariots of Fire, at one point, along with other music, because that movie just came out a few years before that. July 29th. In 1976, I saw more track and field events at the Montreal Olympics that day. July 30th. That was the day, way back in 1729, almost 300 years ago, that Baltimore was founded. The small village of Baltimore, very small village, of course, at first, long before it became a much larger city. The official birthday of Baltimore is July 30th in the year 1729. So that means in just 6 more years, in 2029, will be the 300-year anniversary. So I'm sure there'll be some major celebrations 6 years from now. And so we come to July 31st, the last day of July, and we go back to the 1976 Montreal Olympics, where I saw 9 events in track and field that day, decided 9 gold medal events, including 4 relay races, 2 men and 2 women, the men's high jump final, and the marathon. At least I saw the beginning and the end, because most of the marathon was on the roads. But in those days, at both the Munich and Montreal Olympics, which I attended in 1972 and 1976, the marathon race would start in the main stadium. The runners would run 2 laps around the track, then go out for most of the 26 miles, but come back to the stadium the last quarter mile, so you would see the winner. In the meantime, for a little over 2 hours in between is when they had the other track events. So I was rooting for either Frank Shorter or Bill Rogers to win, the 2 great American runners, both of whom I've met in person. But Sierpinski of East Germany won, but Shorter came in second, just 35 seconds later, and that's pretty close for a marathon when you're talking about more than 2 hours of running. Shorter took the silver medal this time. He won the gold medal in Munich 4 years earlier. Then, later that night, was the gold medal soccer game in the same stadium. East Germany and Poland played for the gold medal. Now, Poland was the defending champion from Munich 4 years earlier, but East Germany won the game by a score of 3-1. So actually, I think I saw as many as 10 gold medals awarded that day, 9 in track and field and the soccer gold medal. So I got to hear a lot of national anthems. But it was nice the U.S. won some relays there. But anyway, you get to hear, it's one thing about the Olympics, you get to hear many different national anthems. It's very interesting. That was the second last day of the Montreal Olympics, which really ended August 1st, but on Sunday it was equestrian and the closing ceremony, which I went to those 2 events also. But that final day of July was one of the most remarkable days in sports I've ever seen in my life in person. It really was. Well, there you have the month of July, many events in history and my personal life which I've memorized to share with all of you today. This is Phil Easter, the amazing memory man. As the great CBS newsman Edward R. Murrow said back in the 1950s when he finished his broadcast, good night and good luck.